Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here at Queen's Park to launch a very significant and bold undertaking by Tim Hudak and the PC Party. As some of you know, long before I became a member of the provincial parliament, I was an electrician, I was a laborer, and a contractor. I made things with my hands, which is getting to be fewer and fewer of those people in this province. But when it comes to our skilled trades force, I know what I'm talking about. And what I saw, I sometimes didn't like. I especially didn't like seeing people being told by union bosses that when they could work, how they would work, and if they would work. And sometimes they were even supposed to believe in what they were supposed to believe. That's why I believe that it's time to modernize our labor laws in this province. They were created at a time when protectionism was the byword here in Ontario and across Canada. Some of them go back to the 1940s. Though it's the 21st century now, the age of restrictions and obstructions facing labor must come to an end. We need to promote freedom for workers if we want to encourage economic growth and prosperity. So Tim Hudak and I are here today to present to Ontarians the second in our series of Paths to Prosperity white papers. This one is called Flexible Labor Markets, and it's based on the premise that we can no longer tinker with labor laws in this province if we're ever going to unleash our true potential in competitiveness and job creation. It's time for a major change, fundamental change in labor laws and the agencies that govern them. And I'd like to now pass it over to our leader, Tim Hudak. Hudak, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Randy. And folks, thanks again for being here today. The world has changed, and our economy and economies around the world have changed as well. And the reality of our marketplace is it's changing with the times. But the rules that are governing the workplace, they haven't changed. And the way that many of our unions are run, particularly our public sector unions, haven't caught up with times. No business today would be caught operating with a typewriter or a rotary phone, but our union laws and many union practices are still stuck in the 1940s. So it's time to open up Ontario to new economic opportunities, to put individual workers ahead of union bosses. And I know Ontarians will thrive in a province that has balanced budgets, lower taxes, affordable energy, a well-educated, competitive workforce. I see Ontario leading again, not at the back of the pack like we are today. But to get there, we need to take some difficult but bold decisions to bring a new path forward. And part of that, a more responsive, innovative public sector workplace and modernizing our labor laws for more flexibility. You know, as Randy said, to help get there, we need to modernize our labor laws, our regulations, and our agencies. Just look at the last number of years. We've lost 300,000 well-paying manufacturing jobs, even more in resources. These are good middle-class jobs that have fled our province. We're seeing a hollowing out of the manufacturing sector, and we're seeing Ontario slip towards Rust Belt status. We need change, and we need change to capture opportunities and drive our province forward again. So that means we need to re-examine outdated rules in the workplace that date back to the mid-21st century and some even further, and adapt them to the realities of 2012 and beyond. The marketplace is different, competition more intense, and individuals, more sophisticated, better educated, want to take more of their own decisions in their own hands. Labor laws and too many union leaders have not kept up with the times. And I don't think anybody in this room, the province of Ontario, wants to see Ontario's slow decline into Rust Belt status. It's time for a new approach. And that's where we're releasing our second in a series of white papers, Paths to Prosperity, Flexible Labor Markets. Bold new ideas for getting our economic fundamentals right and building investment and jobs in our province again. So today's white paper follows May's hotly debated Paths to Prosperity, Affordable Energy. And we're doing this because big challenges require big ideas and big solutions. The reforms we're putting on the table for consideration today would be potential game changers to bring new investment and good quality jobs into our province and to reverse the decline we've seen in business in our province. So these discussions are intended to spark debate, solicit public feedback on our Ontario PC ideas to create jobs and see Ontario lead again. So let me give you a bit of an overview. I know many of you already have the paper in hand, but here's 4 key areas of reform, quite frankly, needed today. Number 1, giving the individual worker a choice whether to become a union member or not. I just don't think that a person should be fired simply because they don't want to be part of a union. Number 2, making union leaders more accountable to the unionized employees. I think a lot of unionized employees would be quite upset to see their union dues go to support student strikers in Quebec or to go to anti-Israel campaigns. It's not right. Union dues should be used for collective bargaining for the workplace, not for political causes that the workers do not support. Third, modernizing outdated tendering rules to open up more government infrastructure work to free market competition. In short, end the closed shop bidding in the province. You know, the Toronto Star did a very good job exposing this past week, where we saw with the Toronto District School Board the fact they had closed tendering. You can only go to one union, and you saw outrageous costs like a pencil sharpener that cost $143, putting in a light socket for $3,000, where it took 4 hours, but taxpayers were billed for 76 hours, or the $19,000 sign that I think should have cost $3,000, but had $16,000 in labor. It's not right. It's not right for taxpayers. It's not right for the students. It's not right for those who depend on public services. This paper proposes ending closed tendering in government throughout our province. And fourth and finally, reforming Ontario's workplace agencies to encourage, not discourage, a more flexible workforce in job creation. Modernizing our Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. And in fact, this paper proposes allowing some competition, private sector competition, to the WSIB. The WSIB comes from an era of the horse-drawn buggy, where a milkman would still deliver a carton of milk to your door via horse. That's changed. WSIB needs to change. And part of that change, allowing private sector competition to give choice within the system. A bit of competition can make the world go round. So while the whole issue of union leaders misusing their power has come under increasing public scrutiny lately, revelations of the Toronto Trades Council demanding a cut of contracts, forcing workers to campaign for Liberal politicians, hugely inflating school maintenance costs. Ontario families were rightly quite upset and shocked at these revelations. It's time for change in our province. It's time to get Ontarians back to work. It's time to make the public service accountable to the people who actually pay the bills. And it's time to open up our economy for new and better opportunities for individual workers, not just union bosses. Today's Path to Prosperity white paper, Flexible Labor Markets, is a step towards doing that. It's part of our comprehensive integrated plan of lower taxes, affordable energy, less red tape and regulation, and a modern, flexible workforce to help our great province lead again. Thanks very much. Randy and I are glad to take any questions that you may have.
Tim, I'm just a little confused about you're talking about Ontario's slow decline to Rust Belt status, but last time I checked, Indiana and Ohio have some of the most permissive labor laws in the United States, and that hasn't really helped their economy. So I'm just curious, how would giving unions less power necessarily give workers better paying jobs?
You know, the pretty simple supply and demand. I mean, just think back to my basic economics. The more flexible the workplace, the greater demand there's going to be for workers. If you have a flexible workplace where businesses can adjust to market conditions, they're more likely to open up in that jurisdiction. Or if they're competing jurisdictions, to choose jobs in that province, for example. And the greater the demand is for workers, for employees, the better that is for wages over time. And I think if you look at jurisdictions that actually have workers' choice laws, you've seen those jurisdictions actually grow faster. They're creating more jobs and have had greater increases in wages than those that don't.
You're talking about Saskatchewan and Alberta, where resources are kind of driving that, though, right?
Well, you know, even in the States, for example, those that actually have, give the right for workers to choose whether to be in a union or not, have grown faster. They've added on more jobs, and they've seen income grow much faster. I think the figure, we get into you, Rob, later, but I think that we've seen an 11% greater growth rate 11% greater rate in job creation as well, and similar increases in wages for those states that have worker choice. Here's the other thing, too, that people often miss when we talk about workers' choice. You know, Canada is actually unique in saying to workers they can actually be fired if they refuse to join a union. That just seems such an old policy from a day gone by. England, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the States, they all allow some form of workers' choice. If we truly want to compete for jobs in a modern economy in 2012, we should allow that as well.
Did you consult any union leaders on this?
There are some that were part of our consultations. There are some that we'll hear from, and part of the white paper process is to hear the ideas, where we want to go, and gauge that reaction. I don't think they'll necessarily embrace these changes. Some, though, I think will recognize that we need to actually modernize our labor laws to get them out of the 1940s and 1950s into 2012 and beyond. And some will do a better job. Some will be more accountable to their workers than others. But the bottom line here, Steve, this will make the union leaders more accountable to the actual workers who pay the union dues. And they have more accountability, more flexibility in the workplace. That's good in the long run for job creation and investment in our province.
Mike Harris, who's a pretty strong leader, even he didn't go after the RAND formula. Have you got the stones to go after this thing?
We put it on the table, and you know, you recognize Justice Rand. I mean, this was what, 1946, something like that. So Justice Rand made a decision, almost 70 years ago, reflecting a very different workplace, an era of much more muscle jobs, the era of the typewriter, the rotary phone, even the operator that would connect your calls. And I bet you Justice Rand never contemplated that union dues would go into political campaigns like attacks on Israel, which just starting to exist at the time, would never use union dues to support student protests in Quebec against tuition fees. I don't think he ever contemplated that type of workplace. And workers are different today than they were in 1946. They're better educated, more sophisticated, higher productivity, more talent. And Steve, I'll stand by this. They want to have more say in decisions in the workplace and where their dues go.
Jim, how do you think it's going to go over that you're, quoting a lot from U.S. states in here and talking about basically trying to align Ontario's labor laws with unionization situation in the states?
Well, I mean, let's be clear about this, and Randy's done a lot of research on this, and he's brought forth some private members' bills, as you know, and I commend him for the homework he's done here. So let me give you top line, and Randy can add some more. The reality is worker choice exists in most like jurisdictions. It's hard to think of a place that doesn't have it. So yes, it exists in the States, but also exists in England. I think the Human Rights Commission, or whatever they actually call it, in Europe, tribunal, made a decision as far back as 1981 on this. Australia, New Zealand. So this is actually the reality in comparative countries across the world. We're behind the times. So is this groundbreaking in Canada? Yeah, it is. Is it groundbreaking for the rest of the world that are taking our jobs? No, and we need to catch up. You may know that Premier Brad Wall in Saskatchewan has put similar proposals on the table. He has a consultation document out. Ours goes farther in some ways, his may in others. But it's a debate we need to have in this country, because I'm worried about the jobs we're losing, and I'm worried about a decline into Rust Belt status. Randy, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. You asked about relying heavily on data from the states, and that's very evident why we're doing that. There we have a good picture for comparative analysis between states that have a similar legislative framework as we do here in Ontario, and those states that have the workers' choice. Looking at the European Union, the UK, you don't have that ability to contrast, because none of the European Union or the UK have that restrictive labor policy as we have here. So there's the obvious reason for comparative analysis, we've got to look at the states. And I think it is important just to reiterate that once again, in the European Human Rights Council, they have struck down, going back to the 80s, they've struck down that security clause in union contracts that forces people to become a member. They've struck that down as against human rights. That's why we don't have it available there.
Is it your opinion that we would be better off without unions altogether?
No,
Encourage businesses.
No, go ahead, and I'll back you up.
listen, this is about productivity, raising standards of living, increasing jobs. It provides for accountability. It provides for freedom. This is not about not having unions, absolutely not. This is about improving the economic performance of this province in relation to the rest of the provinces, but also recognizing that this labor legislation that we have presently is antiquated, it's out of date, it comes from a time of a more protectionist era, and we're in a free trade, free market, global economy now, and our labor legislation has to reflect it.
How is opting out of union dues helping the economy? I'm just trying to see what's the rationale between creating jobs and reforming the labor laws, the way you're proposing?
The more flexible the workplace, the more likely you'll have investment in a jurisdiction, state, a province, a country. And when you actually have greater demand for workers, that increases wages across the board. The challenge we have now is we're actually losing jobs. 300,000 in the manufacturing sector. We lost 2,000 jobs at GM. So we have the opposite occurring. We have downward pressure on wages in the real world in the private sector. We've not addressed it in the public sector, and we're talking more about that. So if you look at, for example, the recent data, Ontario is dead last, 10th of all the provinces in income growth, because we're losing jobs. If you want to increase incomes, you increase productivity, you increase flexibility in the workplace, and you increase the demand for workers. That's what these reforms do.
Tim, are you prepared to do this even if the labor movement rises up en masse to campaign against you during the election? Because certainly that might be a possibility.
I guess we all come to a time where we decide whether to take action based on narrow political interest or doing what's right for the province. And this is what's right for the province. It's something I've thought about a long time. We've done our research, we've talked about it in caucus, we've consulted broadly. I just think that when you have labor laws that are stuck in the 1940s and 1950s, that they're dramatically out of touch with the realities of a 21st century economy. And so we can think here and now, we can bury our head in the sands, we could cross our fingers and hope that if we don't make changes, we'll get donations from the unions. I've got a different view. I'm worried about where Ontario is going. I want to see us as a leader again, and that's why I'm proposing bold and courageous changes to labor laws, to energy policy, and public service reform that propel Ontario forward to the front of the pack.
Is this an election platform or is this a discussion paper?
And we'll do our election platform when the time comes. These are directional. These are ideas we're putting out there for debate. I think that we need to take these challenges on, but we'll listen to what the public has to say. Those that are involved in the process, do we have it right? Do we need to be changed in any way? But it gives you the direction we want to go, just like an energy policy. Reliable, affordable hydro, and a flexible workplace we can actually attract jobs again, and we're not afraid to put out there the tough issues.
Tim, you call these bold and courageous. Why do you think the Liberals have not been bold and courageous about changing labor
I think they're
laws?
stuck in the past, and I don't think they have actually come to grips with the great challenges facing Ontario today. That's that we spend too much money in government, and we no longer have a competitive economy. I know when you've been in government for a long time, and this happens to all parties, you get stuck in the past, you don't address the times, you don't adjust to the changing dynamics on the ground. But there should be a 4-alarm bell out there. With the job losses we've seen in the province, with the downgrading of our recent credit after the budget, the fact that we're careening towards a $411 billion debt. We're in trouble. We're in a jam. And I worry that Ontario is on the decline. If we truly want to see Ontario a leader again, we want to look at the big picture in the long run, we need changes like this to move us forward. I don't think the current government gets that.
Tim, I didn't hear you say anything, though, about the Liberals' ties to unions. Do you think that has any sort of an impact?
You know, it's a very good point here, that it's almost like government today has become its own special interest group. And you have the unions on one side of the table and a government elected with significant union money on the other side of the table. So who's standing up for taxpayers? The reforms we're talking about today will help to address that, to help restore the balance between public sector pay and benefits and private sector realities. And Mike, there'll be more ahead in terms of public service reform that'll do two things: reduce the size and cost of government and restore service to the public service.
Presumably you wanted this to be provocative. Sorry, Steve. Someone from the union movement has just emailed me and said, this is written, meaning your white paper is written as if Ontario were Wisconsin or Ohio, and this is a quote, a declaration of war with organized labor. Is that your intent? I mean, Do you want to go to war, go to the barricades against unions? Because it may actually help you politically with the silent majority of Ontarians who maybe aren't union workers or whatever.
Yeah, I just have a very different view from that, hyperbole. This is all about creating jobs. This is all about advancing investment in our province and ensuring that our workers actually have more take-home pay at the end of the day. And it's also about accountability, making sure that the union leaders are accountable to those who pay the bills. Are these bold steps in the Canadian context? Absolutely. But this has been the reality in like jurisdictions from England down to New Zealand to the States for some time. I just think in the world we're facing today, where Ontario is fading economically, where we have anemic growth at best, we need bold change. And this is part of a comprehensive plan to do just that. I think the time for treading water and clicking our heels and hoping for the best, it's behind us. We need to get into the 21st century, and this is what this does.
Sorry, just on another matter.
This is, we get the camera right up at us.
You got it. I think today's your 3rd anniversary as PC party leader. And
Is it
I
really?
just wondered whether you could tell us why and how you think you are a better, more mature, more experienced leader today than you were 3 years ago.
Man, see, that's not in my Q&A script here, Steve, so you're asking me right off the top. I didn't know that. I had my head down in the labor paper and some other current events. But, listen, it's a bit of a baptism by fire. When you become leader and you got it ramped up for a campaign pretty quickly. And I think if there's a self-critique, I could say what I've learned in the last 3 years now. People looking for the positive, optimistic, conservative alternative. I think last time around I did a really good job telling you what was wrong with Dalton McGuinty. I think I did a heck of a job of pointing out his faults and tell you enough about where I wanted to go, the kind of Ontario I wanted to see. And we're laying that out now, piece by piece, brick by brick, a comprehensive plan to make Ontario a leader again. Lesson learned, a bit the hard way. We're moving forward.